but never leaving. This isn't just a disappearance. This is a riddle that mocks logic. This is the vanishing of Brian Shaffer. April 1st, 2006. Brian Randall Shaffer entered the world on February 25, 1979, in Pickerington, Ohio, a suburb nestled just east of Columbus where the neighborhoods were stitched together with winding streets, cul-de-sacs, and a sense of small-town pride. Pickerington, in the late 70s and early 80s, still carried the calm of a growing town on the outskirts of a big city, a place where children biked until streetlights flickered on, where families gathered for Friday night football games, and where the pulse of daily life was measured not by chaos, but by community. For Randy and Renee Shaffer, the arrival of their first son was a moment of joy. They had dreamed of building a family rooted in love and stability, and Brian, their firstborn, became the bright center of that hope. From the very beginning, Brian's personality shone through. As a toddler, he had a curious, searching gaze, eyes that lingered on things longer than most children's did, as if trying to understand them from the inside out. Renee often joked that her son was born with questions already tucked behind his smile. She remembered the way he would toddle around the kitchen, pointing at everything, babbling endlessly, eager for names, eager for meaning. Randy, pragmatic and hardworking, would scoop Brian up in his arms and bounce him in front of the TV when Ohio State football was on, laughing at how mesmerized his boy was by the shifting colors of the game. By the time Brian was old enough to start school, it was clear he had inherited both his father's determination and his mother's warmth. He excelled in the classroom, especially in science, where he seemed drawn to the mysteries of the natural world. Teachers often remarked on his unusual ability to absorb facts quickly and then retell them in ways that made other children listen. But Brian wasn't a bookish recluse. He was the kind of boy who could spend hours building Lego cities on his bedroom floor and then run outside to play baseball with the neighborhood kids, switching between worlds without missing a beat. When his younger brother Derek was born, Brian slid naturally into the role of protector. He wasn't jealous of the new attention on the baby. Instead, he became Derek's early guide, showing him how to throw a ball, teaching him the lyrics to songs on the radio, and looking out for him in the schoolyard. Their bond would remain strong into adulthood, a brotherly tether that withstood life's unpredictability. The Shaffer household thrived on modest routines. Renee, with her soft laugh and gentle voice, was the nurturing center. She encouraged reading, creativity, and empathy, always reminding her sons that kindness mattered as much as intelligence. Randy was the stabilizer, a man of steady habits who believed in discipline, honesty, and perseverance. Together, they provided Brian and Derek with a home that was not wealthy in material excess, but rich in security and affection. As Brian grew older, his charisma became more evident. In elementary school, he was already the boy everyone gravitated toward, not because he sought attention, but because he radiated it. By the time he entered middle school, he was tall for his age, with sandy hair and a smile that seemed permanently half-cocked in amusement. He had an ability to move easily between groups. The athletes respected him, the quieter kids trusted him, the teachers liked him. He could be mischievous, pulling pranks that skirted the line between trouble and charm, but he never lost that streak of earnestness that made him likable even when he pushed boundaries. Music entered his life with a force that was almost defining. By his teenage years, Brian had become enamored with Pearl Jam, a band whose songs seemed to echo the restless, searching quality within him. Eddie Vedder's voice, raw and powerful, spoke to him in ways he couldn't always articulate. Friends later recalled that Brian would close his eyes, headphones on, letting the music wash through him as if it were both escape and meditation. Music wasn't just background noise. It was a lens through which he processed the world, a companion that never left his side. High school in Pickerington was a tapestry of typical suburban rituals: football games, dances, late-night drives, and Brian experienced it all with a kind of easy grace. He played baseball for a while, attended parties, and dated, though he was never defined by one group or one relationship. What set him apart was his balance. He could be serious about academics without being perceived as a nerd. He could be social without being shallow. Friends remembered him as someone you could confide in during quiet moments and someone who could just as easily light up a crowded room with his energy. During those years, the seed of medicine began to grow. Brian's curiosity about the human body and his desire to help people found an outlet in his biology and anatomy classes. While other students memorized material mechanically, Brian absorbed it with fascination, often going beyond what was required to learn more. A teacher once remarked that he had the mind of a scientist but the heart of an artist, a rare combination that made him both analytical and compassionate. When he graduated high school in the late 90s, Brian knew he wanted more than just a job. He wanted a calling. That ambition led him to Ohio State University, where he majored in microbiology. The transition to college life was exhilarating for him. He reveled in the independence, in the vastness of the campus, in the opportunities to reinvent himself. He thrived academically, throwing himself into his studies with discipline, but he also embraced the social life that came with being in one of the largest universities in the country. Columbus was alive, buzzing with energy, and Brian moved through it with a sense of belonging. College life brought long nights of studying and just as many long nights of bar hopping, concerts, and spontaneous road trips. Brian was equally at home buried in textbooks or belting out lyrics at a live show. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't afraid to live in the moment either. His circle of friends widened, and he became known as someone who could lighten the mood even in the most stressful times. He was the kind of friend who would stay up late to help you cram for an exam and then drag you out to celebrate afterward. Graduating with his degree in microbiology, Brian took the next step and entered Ohio State's College of Medicine. The decision was a culmination of years of interest and ambition, but it was also a daunting challenge. Medical school demanded everything: time, focus, resilience, and Brian rose to meet it. His classmates remembered his ability to remain calm under pressure, his knack for making group study sessions more manageable, and his unique ability to balance the seriousness of medicine with levity. He carried a stethoscope and a smile, and somehow managed to excel without losing his warmth. Yet even as he moved deeper into the world of medicine, another dream pulled at him. Brian often mused about leaving it all behind one day, escaping to a tropical island where he could open a beach bar and live in shorts and sandals. He loved the ocean, the sun, the freedom of imagining a life where responsibilities melted into waves and music played endlessly in the background. It wasn't that he didn't love medicine. He did, but he also longed for simplicity, for a break from the weight of expectations. Friends laughed at the idea, but they knew he was half serious. He had that restless streak, a part of him that was always looking for something just out of reach. In the mid-2000s, just as his career seemed to be rising, tragedy struck. His mother, Renee, who had always been his emotional anchor, was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. The news shook the family to its core. For Brian, it was especially devastating. Here he was, training to become a doctor, dedicating his life to healing, and yet he was powerless to stop the disease consuming the person he loved most. He spent hours at her side, talking to her, comforting her, trying to keep her spirits up. Even as medical school consumed his days, he devoted himself to being present for her. Her illness lasted months, and during that time Brian carried himself with strength, though inside he was breaking. Friends noticed the change. He was still funny, still engaging, but there was a shadow behind his eyes. The grief etched itself into him quietly, and when Renee passed away in March 2006, the wound was profound. It was a blow that no amount of resilience could mask. He leaned on his father Randy and his brother Derek, but each was dealing with the loss in their own way, and grief became a silent language among them. Despite the devastation, life demanded movement. Brian was still in medical school, still navigating exams and rotations, still trying to envision a future that suddenly seemed more fragile than before. He had a girlfriend, Alexis, who loved him deeply and with whom he was building a vision of marriage and family. To many, Brian appeared to be carrying on, but those closest to him sensed the storm beneath the surface. By the spring of 2006, Brian was 27, tall, handsome, and seemingly poised for success. Yet beneath the surface, he was weary. The grind of medical school, the fresh grief of losing his mother, and his restless longing for escape all collided in a way that made him crave release. Music helped, Alexis helped, his friends helped, but he needed more. He needed a night to forget, a night to let go. And so, as March drew to a close and spring break began, Brian Shaffer decided to step out with his friend Clint Florence and dive into the neon heartbeat of Columbus nightlife. He had no way of knowing that this night would be the last anyone would ever see of him. The night of March 31st, 2006, carried with it the promise of spring in Columbus. After a long Ohio winter, the city breathed easier in the warmer air, and on High Street near Ohio State University, students and young professionals spilled into the night in waves, moving between bars, restaurants, and clubs. The weekend coincided with the beginning of spring break, and for many, it was a chance to exhale. Classes had ended, exams were paused, and the city's nightlife was alive with music, chatter, and laughter. For Brian Shaffer, 27 years old and weighed down by the grind of medical school and the fresh grief of his mother's death, the night promised more than fun. It promised escape. He had been studying relentlessly for weeks, his life orbiting around rotations, textbooks, and the quiet heaviness that grief leaves behind. When his friend William Clint Florence suggested going out, Brian agreed without hesitation. He needed to shake off the shadows. He needed to feel normal again. They began the evening with a plan familiar to college students and young professionals alike: bar hopping. Columbus had no shortage of spots to drink, laugh, and momentarily forget the pressures of life. Brian and Clint first met at Brian's apartment, where Brian had spent the early part of the evening preparing. He pulled on a pair of jeans, a striped short-sleeve polo shirt, and casual shoes. Tall and fit, with sandy brown hair that framed his face, he looked like any other young man ready for a night out. But inside there was a blend of excitement and fatigue. He was glad to be with Clint, glad to have a few hours away from seriousness, glad to be alive in the noise of the city. The two friends began their night at a couple of bars closer to Ohio State's campus. They drank, laughed, and soaked in the atmosphere. At one point, Brian called Alexis, his girlfriend who was out of town visiting family, to say goodnight. She remembered his voice being calm, affectionate, even a little playful. Nothing about the conversation suggested trouble or despair. To her, it was just another normal call, another sign of the stable relationship they shared. She hung up, expecting to see him again after the weekend. As the night wore on, Clint suggested they finish at one of the area's most popular bars, the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The bar, located on the second floor of the South Campus Gateway complex, had become a fixture of the nightlife scene. It was known for its quirky name, neon lights, and constant crowd of students and locals. It wasn't the fanciest place, but it was alive, and that was enough. Around 9 p.m., Brian and Clint made their way there, their laughter caught by the surveillance cameras mounted in the complex. The Ugly Tuna was buzzing that night. Music pumped through the speakers, the bass line thudding beneath layers of conversation and clinking glasses. Groups crowded the bar, people danced, bartenders poured drinks at a frantic pace. Brian fit right in, his tall frame moving easily through the throngs, his easy smile catching attention. At some point, he and Clint met up with Meredith Reed, another friend who joined them for the night. The trio danced, drank, and drifted through the crowd together. Around 1:55 a.m., the bar's surveillance cameras captured Brian stepping outside, onto the balcony, where he struck up a conversation with two young women. The footage showed him leaning casually, laughing, gesturing with his hands as if telling a story. He appeared relaxed, alive in the moment. The women would later confirm that the conversation was light, friendly, nothing unusual. After a few minutes, Brian turned back toward the entrance, walked inside, and from that moment forward, he ceased to exist on camera. The cameras captured everyone else. Clint leaving, Meredith leaving, streams of patrons exiting as the night wound down. But Brian was never seen walking out. He was never seen on the escalator, never caught on any of the nearby cameras positioned throughout the Gateway complex. It was as if, after re-entering the bar, he had evaporated into thin air. When Alexis tried to reach him the next morning, her calls went unanswered. She assumed at first that he was tired or had crashed somewhere. Clint, too, didn't think much of it. After all, nights out often ended with scattered plans and missed connections. But when a full day passed with no word, unease began to grow. Alexis called again and again. Still nothing. By Sunday, the dread was undeniable. Brian was not answering, not showing up, not responding in any way. On Monday, when Brian missed a planned meeting with his father, Randy, alarm bells rang loudly. Brian was not irresponsible. He was not the type to vanish without a word. Concern hardened into panic, and soon the Shaffer family was in full search mode, calling friends, classmates, anyone who might know where he had gone. When those efforts failed, Randy contacted the Columbus Police Department. The police began their investigation at the obvious place, the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Detectives combed through the bar, questioned staff, and pulled the surveillance footage. What they found unsettled even the most experienced among them. The cameras captured Brian entering, and they captured him stepping out to talk to the women, and they captured him re-entering, but they did not capture him leaving. The bar had only two main exits, both monitored by cameras. The idea that a 6'2" man could vanish from a crowded bar without a trace baffled everyone. Detectives entertained several theories. Could Brian have disguised himself? Could he have slipped past the cameras in a blind spot? Could he have exited through an employee-only door or a service exit not covered by surveillance? But every avenue led to more confusion. The exits were checked, the blind spots reviewed, the cameras scrutinized frame by frame. Still, no Brian. The possibility that he never left the bar haunted the investigation. Police searched the Ugly Tuna from top to bottom, checking storage rooms, closets, even air ducts. They brought in cadaver dogs, hoping to detect the scent of decomposition if Brian's body were somehow hidden within the building. The dogs found nothing. There was no evidence of foul play inside the bar, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The building yielded no answers. As days turned into weeks, the case captured public attention. Local media ran stories about the young medical student who had vanished from a bar under the gaze of surveillance cameras. Friends and family distributed flyers with Brian's face, pleading for information. Alexis, devastated and confused, called Brian's phone constantly, hoping for a miracle. One call even connected. His phone rang for a few moments before cutting off, but the signal was traced to a cell tower far away, suggesting a glitch rather than a true connection. Still, it was enough to fuel hope, enough to make Alexis believe he might still be out there. Randy threw himself into the search. He worked with police, spoke to reporters, and followed every lead. Derek, younger but equally determined, joined him in canvassing the city. The family refused to believe Brian had simply walked away. Something had happened, something unthinkable. Clint, meanwhile, faced scrutiny. He had been with Brian that night, the last friend to see him, and yet his account left gaps. He insisted he had no idea what happened, that he and Meredith left and assumed Brian had stayed behind. He cooperated with police but declined to take a polygraph, raising eyebrows among investigators and the public. Meredith, by contrast, did take the test and passed. Rumors began to swirl, suspicions rose, but no concrete evidence tied Clint or anyone else to Brian's disappearance. The investigation sprawled outward. Police checked hospitals, homeless shelters, morgues. They interviewed cab drivers, bouncers, other patrons from that night. They traced Brian's bank accounts, his credit cards, his cell phone. Nothing had been touched since that night. It was as if his life had been paused, left frozen in the early hours of April 1st, 2006. As the weeks wore on, theories multiplied. Some believed Brian had staged his own disappearance, fueled by grief and a longing to escape. Others believed he had been the victim of foul play, lured away from the bar and silenced. Still others whispered about urban legends, about tunnels beneath the city, about the possibility of an accident gone unnoticed. Each theory carried with it tantalizing pieces of possibility, but none provided the full picture. Through it all, the eerie fact remained. Brian Shaffer was captured walking into the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and he was never captured walking out. It was a puzzle that seemed to defy logic, a mystery that gnawed at everyone who encountered it. His family's heartbreak deepened with each passing day, as hope battled despair and the reality of his absence grew heavier. In the days that followed Brian Shaffer's disappearance, Columbus became a city on edge. News anchors spoke his name nightly. His face appeared on posters and flyers taped to light poles, store windows, and campus bulletin boards. He was the medical student who vanished without a trace, the young man who walked into a bar and never came out, the son and brother and boyfriend whose absence seemed to carry the weight of something larger than a missing person case. People stopped each other in grocery store lines, at gas stations, in classrooms, trading theories in hushed tones. The city felt haunted, unsettled by the idea that such a thing could happen under the glare of security cameras and within shouting distance of hundreds of witnesses. For Randy Shaffer, the days blurred into one another, each one filled with phone calls, interviews, and the gut-wrenching task of searching for his son without knowing where to begin. He visited the Ugly Tuna again and again, pressing managers, staff, even strangers for details. He stood outside in the cold spring nights, staring up at the neon sign, imagining Brian just inside, laughing with friends, alive. Derek, quieter, but equally determined, accompanied him on searches, walking alleys, scanning faces in shelters, stopping anyone who resembled his brother. They were men grasping at smoke, but they refused to stop. The Columbus Division of Police assembled a dedicated team for the case. Detectives sifted through hours of surveillance footage from not only the Ugly Tuna, but the surrounding Gateway complex. They tracked every individual who entered and exited the bar that night, comparing timestamps, cross-referencing witness statements. It became a labyrinth of data, but the conclusion was always the same. Brian went in, but he never came out. The impossibility of it gnawed at them. At first, investigators leaned toward theories of foul play. Was Brian lured into a trap? Had someone inside the bar harmed him and disposed of his body without detection? But the thorough searches of the premises yielded nothing. No blood, no struggle, no trace. And how could someone smuggle a 6'2" man out of a crowded bar without being noticed? The logistics seemed improbable. Then came the theory of voluntary disappearance. Maybe Brian, reeling from his mother's death, the pressures of medical school, and his restless dreams of escape, had staged his own vanishing. Friends recalled how he often spoke of running away to a tropical island, of leaving behind the stress for a beach bar and a guitar. Could he have taken the opportunity to slip away, to build a new life somewhere far from Columbus? On paper, it seemed plausible, but to those who knew him best, the idea felt hollow. Brian had responsibilities, relationships, and a deep sense of loyalty. He had called Alexis that very night, ending the conversation with words of love. He had exams coming up, a future ahead. To walk away without a word would have been unlike him. Alexis refused to believe he had left her. She clung to the memory of his voice on the phone, to the plans they had made together. She called his cell phone constantly in the days after, leaving messages filled with love and desperation. Then came the moment that fueled her hope. Days after the disappearance, her call to his phone actually rang before cutting off. It wasn't a straight-to-voicemail disconnect. It rang. Sprint, his service provider, later suggested it might have been a technical glitch, a phantom signal. But Alexis didn't want to hear that. For her, it was proof. Proof that he was out there, alive, waiting to be found. Her devotion became a symbol of the case. She attended vigils, handed out flyers, spoke to reporters with tears in her eyes. "I know he's alive," she said again and again. "I just want him to come home." People were moved by her loyalty, her refusal to give up, but they were also haunted by it. The image of the young woman waiting for a man who may never return became one of the case's enduring tragedies as the investigation dragged on. Detectives found themselves fielding an ever-widening array of tips. Sightings poured in from across the country. A man resembling Brian seen in Atlanta, another in Michigan, another in Texas. Each lead was checked. Each one evaporated into nothing. Police chased shadows while the media stoked speculation. National outlets picked up the story, transforming Brian into a figure of mystery. Online forums buzzed with theories, amateur sleuths dissecting every detail, every frame of footage. Some suggested he had joined a band of drifters, others that he had fallen victim to human trafficking. Theories flourished in the absence of answers. Randy tried to filter through the noise, but he too was drawn into the endless guessing. He kept a binder of articles, notes, tips. He spoke to psychics out of desperation, even as he knew it was a long shot. He prayed. He begged. He carried the weight of not knowing, which some said was worse than death itself. Derek watched his father age under the strain, his shoulders slumping, his eyes tired. The Shaffer family had already lost Renee, and now they had lost Brian too, though in a way more cruel. Because there was no closure, police did not rule out foul play, and suspicion continued to circle Clint Florence. He had been with Brian that night, yet his refusal to take a polygraph test became a sticking point. Why would a friend refuse if he had nothing to hide? Clint maintained his innocence, saying he didn't trust polygraphs, that they were unreliable. Detectives couldn't force him, and without physical evidence, suspicion remained just that. Suspicion. Meredith, on the other hand, passed her test easily, her story aligning with what investigators already knew. Theories grew darker as time passed. Some believed Brian had stumbled into a construction site near the Gateway complex, fallen, and been accidentally buried or concealed. Others whispered about underground tunnels, urban legends of bodies hidden in the city's underbelly. Still, others believed someone inside the bar had targeted him, harmed him, and hidden him in a way that escaped detection. Each theory brought a shiver of possibility, but no theory produced evidence. The public fascination with the case grew. Television specials featured Brian's story, complete with reenactments of that final night. Internet forums dissected his body language on the footage, his smile, his conversations. Was there a hidden message in his demeanor? Was he saying goodbye without saying it? The case became a mirror for the public's fears. If Brian Shaffer could vanish, then so could anyone. Meanwhile, Alexis's grief deepened. She wore the necklace he had given her. She kept his photos close. She spoke of him in the present tense. She refused to believe he was gone forever. In interviews, her eyes glistened with hope, her voice breaking as she pleaded for answers. "Brian, if you can't hear this," she said once on television, "please know I love you. Please come home." Her faith became both heartbreaking and inspiring, a symbol of love clinging to hope against impossible odds. The months rolled on, and seasons changed. Randy lit candles. Derek tried to carry on with his own life. Alexis returned to school and work, but never stopped searching. The police file grew thicker, yet remained empty of the one thing it needed most: evidence. Leads slowed, tips dwindled, but the mystery endured to be why the end of 2006. Brian's case had transformed from a local tragedy to one of the nation's most perplexing disappearances. He was no longer just a young man from Columbus. He was the man who walked into a bar and never came out, the subject of endless speculation, the ghost who haunted Ohio. His story captured something primal: the terror of absence, the horror of not knowing, the fragility of ordinary life. And through it all, the question that haunted everyone remained the same. Where was Brian Shaffer? Asterisk, watch out for part 2.